OAuth2 is an industry standard for authorization and authentication that is implemented across most enterprises today. Progress OpenEdge supports OAuth2, enabling a Progress Data Object Service to act as a resource server for client applications. However, obtaining an access token from a client application, a key aspect of OAuth2 authorization flow, can still be a complex task. To simplify this task, you can use Kinvey. Convey is a back-end as-a-service platform that provides a host of services on the cloud, such as data storage and user management, that take away a lot of the complexity in developing mobile and web applications. Convey simplifies the task of obtaining an access token by easily integrating with many different authorization servers. A Progress Data Object service can be added as a rapid data service in Convey and then assigned to a Kinvey collection. When a client application accesses the collection using the Kinvey Client SDK, a Kinvey service called Mobile Identity Connect, or MIC, performs the task of communicating with an OAuth2 authorization server, getting the access token from it, and then passing the token transparently to the Progress Data Object service. It can also handle the task of refreshing the access token if the authorization server supports the use of refresh tokens. In addition, because the Progress Data Object Service is being used in a Kinvey collection, users get the benefits of other Kinvey functionalities such as caching, monitoring, and throttling. In this video, you'll see how you can use Kinvey to integrate a Progress Data Object Service with OAuth2 client applications. At a high level, OAuth-based authorization works as follows. A user called a resource owner in OAuth attempts to access some functionality in a client application, typically through a browser. The client application requires some user data called a resource in OAuth to be able to execute the functionality. Before it can access the resource, the client application needs to be authorized by the user. So it sends an authorization request to the user's authorization server. The authorization server authenticates the user either through single sign-on or via a login page and optionally displays an authorization request page or a consent page to the user. If the user grants authorization or consent, the authorization server sends an authorization code to the client application. The client application sends the authorization code back to the authorization server along with its client ID and client secret and requests an access token. The authorization server validates the authorization code and returns an access token, and optionally a refresh token. The client application sends a request containing the access token to a resource server, which hosts the resource that the client application needs. Finally, the resource server validates the access token and returns the resource to the client application. Access tokens are typically valid for a specific duration of time. As long as the access token is valid, the client application can continue to access the resource. Each time it sends a request, it needs to include the access token. If the access token expires, the client application must use the refresh token to get a new access token from the authorization server. Typically, the access token is sent as a digitally signed JSON web token that can be validated by the resource server without the need to contact the authorization server. In the context of OpenEdge, the resource server is a Progress Data Object Service, and the resource is an ABL resource like customer or order that is associated with the Progress Data Object Service. The authorization server can be any identity and access management system, like Okta. The resource owner is a user whose credentials are stored on the authorization server and who has access rights to the resource. The client application can be any third-party application that needs to access the data object service. In this video, we'll use a Kendo UI web application as the client. To set up an OAuth flow between these components, we'll use Convey. We'll add the Progress Data Object Service as a rapid data service in Convey and configure a Convey MIC service to integrate the rapid data service with the authorization server. While Convey can work with a wide range of identity and access management systems, for this video we'll use Okta. The Progress Data Service in Convey will be used in a Kinvey collection, which in turn will be accessed by the Kendo UI client application via the Kinvey SDK. As you can see, there are 3 points of integration. We need to integrate Kinvey with Okta. We need to integrate the Progress Data Object Service with Kinvey. And finally, we need to integrate the Progress Data Object Service with Okta. This is only to enable the Data Object Service to decrypt the access token that it will receive from the Okta authorization server. The challenging task of obtaining the access token from Okta will be handled by the Kinvey MIC service. Let's start by integrating Kinvey with Okta. To do this, we need to perform 2 tasks. First, we need to set up an authorization server in Okta. Second, we need to create an Okta client application to represent our Kinvey MIC service and use the authorization server to apply an access policy to this client application. To prepare for this demonstration, we have already created an Okta administrator account. Let's log into the Okta portal. To start creating an authorization server, we navigate to Security, API. We then click Add Authorization Server. We specify a name for our server, specify an audience, and click Save. This brings us to the Settings page, where we can see a link to the server's metadata URI. Let's open this link and put it aside for now. We'll need it a little later. Next, let's create an Okta client application to integrate our Kinvey MIC service with the authorization server. We click Applications, and then Add Application. To start creating the application, we click Create New App. This opens the Create a New Application integration dialog box, where we select Web as the platform and OpenID Connect as the sign-on method. Then we click Create. Let's give our application a name. The only other field that we must configure is the Login Redirect URI. We can find the URI in the OAuth2 section of the Kinvey MIC documentation. Let's copy this URI and paste it into our Okta application. Then we click Save. This brings us to the General Settings page of the application. Here we must ensure that the grant type is authorization code. We also need to copy the client ID and client secret to a notepad. We'll need these details when we are setting up the Kinvey MIC service. Next, we need to assign users to this application. Let's create a user. We go to Directory, People, and click Add Person. Let's specify a name, email, password, and click Save. This user acts as the resource owner in our OAuth flow. Now let's go back to our application. We click the Assignments tab, then we select Assign, Assign to People, and select the user that we just created. Finally, we click Done. The only thing left to do in Okta is to create an access policy in our authorization server. An access policy specifies the actions that the authorization server must take when a user logs in to the Okta application. Let's go back to our authorization server. We click Access Policies and then Add Policy. Let's provide a name and description. Select our Okta application as the client to which the policy will be applied and click Create Policy. We need to add a rule in our policy. We click Add Rule to open the Add Rule dialog. Let's give our rule a name. As you can see, this is where we can configure the duration for which our access and refresh tokens will be valid based on certain conditions. For our demonstration, we'll select If Grant Type is Authorization Code as our condition and retain the default settings in the rest of the fields. We then click Create Rule. Our authorization server and client applications are ready. The next step is to set up Kinvey to communicate with our authorization server. The Kinvey platform provides a web-based console where you can access all of Kinvey's functionality. To access the console, you need a Kinvey account. We have already created one for this demonstration, so we'll just use that to log into the console. The first thing we need to do is create a Kinvey app. We click Add an App, enter a name for the app, and click Create App. As you can see, the left pane provides access to all of Kinvey's services. The one we're interested in is the Mobile Identity Connect service. Let's click that. Then we click Add Auth service and select OAuth2 since we want to create an OAuth service that communicates with our Okta authorization server. Let's start by giving our service a name. The next property that we need to set is the provider URI. This is where the metadata URI of our Okta authorization server comes in handy. We'll copy the token endpoints and bring it over to the provider URI field. Then we specify the redirect URIs and select authorization code as the grant type. As you may remember, this is the same grant type that we configured in our Okta application. Next, we need to set the grant endpoint. To do this, we need to go back to our authorization server's metadata URI. We copy the authorization endpoint and paste it in the grant endpoint field. Now we need to set the client ID and client secret properties. We had copied these property values from our Okta client application earlier. We'll paste them now. We also need to add two attributes in the Allowed Attributes section, client token and code. Finally, let's save our service. Our Kinvey MIC OAuth service is now integrated with our Okta application, which in turn is integrated with our Okta authorization server. The next step is to integrate our resource server, a Progress Data Object service, with Okta so that it can validate the access token that it will receive through Convey. We have already created a Progress Data Object service in the OpenEdge Developer Studio. As you can see, it is deployed on the default Progress Application Server for OpenEdge instance OE-Pass1. To configure the Data Object service, we need to modify the OEABL security.properties file that is located in the WebInf folder. We begin by changing the client login model to OAuth2. Next, we must set up the key store to decrypt the access token. OpenEdge supports JSON Web Token, or JWT, as the access token format. The OEABL security.properties file has a section on JWT tokens, which we need to configure. First, let's change the signature algorithm to RS-256. Then we can change the key store type to JWK. We also need to set the JWK URL property. We can find this in the metadata URI of our authorization server. Let's navigate to the URI. We copy the JWKS_URI value over to our OEABL security properties file. We'll enter PSC user as our default role and save the file. Before we proceed, we need to set one more property, but in a different file, namely the OAuth REST service client's configuration file, which is in the same location as our OEABL security.properties file. Here we need to enter the client ID of our Okta application. Let's do that now. And we're almost done. Our resource server Progress Data Object service is integrated with our Okta authorization server and is set up to validate access tokens. The final step in setting up the OAuth flow is to integrate our Progress Data Object service with Convey. To do this, we need to add our Progress Data Object service as a rapid data service in Convey. Let's return to our Convey console and click Service Catalog. We click Add a Service. In the New Service dialog, we click Rapid Data and then Progress Data. We enter a name, select our Convey app, specify the service URI and catalog URI of our Progress Data Object service, and select Convey Mobile Connect service as the authentication option. Finally, we click Save. Now that our Progress Data service is set up, we need to add our resources as service objects in Convey. In our case, the Progress Data Object service has only one resource, Customer, that we'll add as a service object in Kinvey. To do this, we click Add Service Objects. Here we have two options. We can either let Kinvey discover our resources automatically or add them manually. For this video, we'll enter the resource details manually. We'll start by providing Customer as the name of the service object. Then we specify the resource name. This resource name must match the name of the ABL resource in OpenEdge. In our example, the ABL resource is also named Customer. Next, we define the primary key of the resource, and then select the operations that we want to allow on the service object. For this video, we'll allow all operations. Finally, we click Save Service Object. One of the advantages of adding our OpenEdge data object service as a data service in Kinvey is that we can use it in a Kinvey collection, and by doing so, leverage other Kinvey features. For our demonstration, we'll only use the collection as a data provider in our Kendo UI client application. Let's return to our Kinvey app. We click Collections and then Add a Collection. We specify Customer as the name of the collection. This must match the name of the service object that we created earlier. Then we click Save. In the Data Source section, we select Use a Data Service, and then select our Progress Data Service and Service Object. Finally, we click Confirm. To prepare for this demonstration, we have already created a Kendo UI client application that we have hosted in a Progress application server for OpenEdge instance. This web application internally uses our customer collection. We have also customized the login page to include an option to sign in via our Kinvey MIC service. Let's test what happens when we launch this application. As you can see, the Kendo UI web application's login page is displayed. We click Login with Mobile Identity Connect. This brings us to the Okta login page where we enter the user's credentials that we created in our Okta client application. And finally, we see our Kendo UI web application grid that draws data from the customer collection in Kinvey. This concludes our demonstration of how we can use Kinvey to integrate a Progress Data Object service with an OAuth2 client application.